I found a tube of lubricant among my husband's things. We hadn't touched in 5 years, so I decided to install hidden cameras in our bedroom. That's when I caught him and my DIL cheating on me. I didn't say a word, just replaced the lubricant with chili oil and kept the footage. But on her wedding day, I decided to serve the divorce papers with a little surprise for all the guests. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a simple tube of lubricant would unravel 32 years of marriage, but there it was, sitting innocently in David's sock drawer, mocking everything I thought I knew about my life. My name is Kelly, and at 58, I believed I had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. Sure, David and I hadn't been intimate in 5 years, but I had convinced myself that was normal. We were getting older. His health wasn't what it used to be, and honestly, I had made peace with it. Or so I told myself every lonely night when I lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, while my own heart ached with a loneliness I couldn't name. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I found it. David had asked me to grab his good watch from the bedroom dresser because he had an important meeting with his business partners. Nothing unusual about that request. I had been doing these small favors for him for decades, the invisible labor that wives do without thinking. I opened his top drawer, pushing aside the usual collection of cufflinks and old receipts, when my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. A small, sleek tube hidden beneath his winter socks. My heart did this strange little flutter as I picked it up, reading the label twice before the words actually registered in my brain. Premium personal lubricant, extra long-lasting. I stood there holding it, my hands trembling slightly, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. The expiration date was still months away, which meant it was recently purchased. Very recently. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Maybe it was for us. Maybe David had been planning some romantic surprise. But deep down, in that place where women keep their darkest fears, I knew better. When was the last time David had even touched me? Really touched me. Not just the perfunctory kiss on the cheek, or the brief pat on my shoulder when he passed behind my chair at dinner. I tried to remember, but the months blurred together in a haze of polite distance and careful avoidance. I heard his footsteps coming down the hallway, so I quickly shoved the tube back where I found it and grabbed his watch. My hands were still shaking when I handed it to him. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, but he was already checking his phone, not really looking at me. "Of course," I replied automatically, the lie rolling off my tongue with practiced ease. "Have a good meeting." He kissed my forehead absently and left. I stood in our bedroom, surrounded by 32 years of shared memories, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The rest of that day passed in a blur of normal activities. I did the laundry, went grocery shopping, prepared dinner, but underneath it all, that tube of lubricant haunted my thoughts. Every mundane task felt surreal, like I was acting in a play where I didn't know my lines. That evening, as David sat in his recliner watching television, I studied his face like I was seeing him for the first time. He was still handsome at 61, his hair silver now but thick, his body still trim from his morning runs. When had he started caring so much about his appearance again? When had he started buying new clothes and wearing cologne to work? The signs had been there, hadn't they? I just hadn't wanted to see them. The late meetings that seemed to happen more frequently. The way he guarded his phone, taking it with him even to the bathroom. The sudden interest in his appearance after years of comfortable complacency. "David," I said during a commercial break, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. He didn't look away from the screen. "Are we happy?" That got his attention. He turned to me with a puzzled expression, like I had asked him to explain quantum physics. "What kind of question is that? Of course we're happy. We have a good life, Kelly. The house is paid off, we're healthy, the kids are doing well. The kids. Our son Marcus was 28 now, married to Leah for 2 years. They lived just 15 minutes away, and Leah had become like the daughter I never had. She was always so sweet to me, always asking about my day, bringing me little gifts from her shopping trips. The thought of her made me smile despite my turmoil. "I suppose you're right," I said, but the words felt hollow. David had already turned back to the television, dismissing my moment of vulnerability with the same casual indifference he had shown me for years. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully beside me. The tube of lubricant might as well have been burning a hole through the dresser drawer. I tried to rationalize it away. Maybe it was old, left over from years ago. Maybe he had bought it optimistically, hoping we might reconnect. Maybe I was being paranoid and insecure. But women's intuition is a powerful thing, and mine was screaming that something was terribly wrong. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision that would change everything. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. I couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty, this limbo between suspicion and denial. I waited until David left for work. Then I got dressed and drove to the electronics store across town. The young man behind the counter looked at me strangely when I asked about hidden cameras. But I told him I was concerned about our housekeeper possibly stealing from us. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was concerned about someone taking something that belonged to me, even if it wasn't money or jewelry. The cameras were smaller than I expected, no bigger than a button, and completely wireless. The salesman explained how they worked, how I could monitor them from my phone, how they would record everything to a cloud storage account. I paid for them in cash, $450 that I took from my secret emergency fund, money I had been saving for years without really knowing why. Installing them felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. I placed one behind our wedding photo on the dresser, another in the bookshelf across from the bed, angled perfectly to capture everything. My hands shook as I tested the angles on my phone, making sure the coverage was complete. As I stood in our bedroom, looking at these tiny electronic eyes that would soon reveal truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face, I felt something inside me harden. Not anger, not yet. Something colder and more determined. Whatever I was about to discover, I would face it with my eyes wide open. I was done being the naive wife who chose comfort over truth. I just had no idea how much that truth would change me. The cameras had been in place for exactly 1 week when I saw something that shattered my world completely. I had been checking the feed obsessively, my phone becoming an extension of my hand as I monitored our bedroom throughout the day. For 6 days, nothing unusual happened. David would come home, change his clothes, maybe take a nap on weekends. Normal, boring activities that made me feel foolish for my suspicions. Then came Thursday afternoon. I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce section trying to decide between organic and regular apples, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the bedroom camera. David wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 hours. My heart started hammering as I opened the app, expecting to see maybe our cat, or perhaps David coming home early with a headache. Instead, I watched my husband walk into our bedroom with another woman. My phone nearly slipped from my hands as I saw them together. David's arm around her waist in a gesture so intimate and familiar that it was clear this wasn't their first time. But it was who he was with that made me physically sick. Leah, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, the woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms, the sweet girl who brought me flowers and asked about my childhood stories, the one who called me Mom Kelly and made me feel like I finally had the daughter I had always wanted. I stood there in the middle of the grocery store, people bustling around me with their carts and their normal lives, while I watched my marriage and my family implode through a 3-inch screen. They moved with the ease of lovers who knew each other's bodies well. David was touching her face with a tenderness I hadn't seen from him in years, maybe decades. She was laughing at something he said, that bright, genuine laugh I thought was reserved for family gatherings and innocent moments. I forced myself to keep watching. Even as my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I needed to see it all. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening in my own home, in my own bed. They weren't rushed or furtive like guilty lovers stealing a moment. They were comfortable, relaxed. This was routine for them. David kissed her neck in a way that suggested he knew exactly what she liked. She responded with an enthusiasm that made it clear she had been anticipating this moment. A woman behind me cleared her throat impatiently, and I realized I had been standing motionless in the middle of the aisle for several minutes. I mumbled an apology and pushed my cart to a quiet corner near the pharmacy, my hands trembling as I continued to watch the betrayal unfold. They were talking, but the cameras didn't have audio. I could see their lips moving, see Leah throw her head back in laughter at something David said. She looked so young next to him, so vibrant. At 26, she was everything I used to be, and everything I would never be again. When they started undressing each other, I almost closed the app. Almost. But something kept me watching, a masochistic need to see the full truth of what my life had become. David's body looked different with her than it ever had with me. Even in our younger years, he was passionate, attentive, present in a way that made me realize how absent he had been in our marriage for longer than I cared to admit. This wasn't just about sex. This was about connection, about desire, about all the things that had slowly drained out of our relationship so gradually I hadn't noticed until they were completely gone. I watched them for 23 minutes. I know because I stared at the timer on my phone, counting every second of my humiliation. When they finished, they lay in our bed talking and laughing, David's fingers playing with her hair in a gesture so tender it took my breath away. Finally, I closed the app and set my phone down in my purse with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I stood there in the grocery store, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of everyday life, feeling like I was drowning in plain sight. The drive home was a blur. I had to pull over twice because the tears were making it impossible to see. By the time I reached our house, David's car was gone. The bedroom looked exactly as I had left it that morning, our bed neatly made, everything in its place. If not for what I had seen on my phone, I never would have known. But I did know, and now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. I sat on our bed, the same bed where my husband had just made love to my son's wife, and tried to process the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just that David was having an affair, it was who he was having it with. Leah wasn't some random woman he had met at work. She was family. She sat at our dinner table every Sunday, helped me cook holiday meals, listened to my stories about David's quirks and habits. How long had this been going on? How many family gatherings had I hosted while they shared secret looks across the table? How many times had Leah hugged me goodbye while carrying the scent of my husband on her skin? And Marcus, my sweet, trusting son who looked at his wife with such adoration, who was planning to start a family with her soon. What would this do to him? I got up and walked to David's dresser, pulling out that damning tube of lubricant, such a small thing to bring down an entire world. I held it in my hands, this evidence of their intimacy, and felt something inside me crystallize into cold, hard resolve. They thought I was naive. They thought I was the dutiful wife who wouldn't look too closely, who would accept whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. They were counting on my ignorance, my willingness to believe the best of people I loved. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I walked to our kitchen and opened the cabinet where I kept my cooking supplies. Hidden behind the vanilla extract and food coloring was a small bottle of chili oil I had bought months ago for a recipe I never made. It was potent stuff, the kind that warned against getting it on your skin or in your eyes. Perfect. I took the lubricant tube to the kitchen sink and carefully emptied most of its contents down the drain. Then, with steady hands that surprised me with their calmness, I refilled it with the chili oil. The consistency was close enough that they probably wouldn't notice the difference until it was too late. As I put the tube back in David's drawer, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This was just the beginning. I had no idea yet what my end game would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. Leah and David wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they were about to discover that 32 years of marriage had taught me a few things about patience, planning, and the art of the long game. Let them think they were so clever, so careful. Let them believe they were smarter than the naive, older woman they were betraying. They had no idea what was coming for them. The chili oil worked faster than I had anticipated. 3 days after I made the substitution, I was folding laundry in the guest room when I heard David curse loudly from our bedroom. Then the shower turned on, running for what seemed like an hour. When he finally emerged, his face was flushed and he looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Everything all right?" I asked with the perfect amount of wifely concern, just some irritation. He muttered, avoiding my eyes. "Must be that new detergent you bought." I nodded sympathetically while internally savoring the moment. "I'll switch back to the old brand." But my small victory felt hollow when I realized the true scope of what I was dealing with. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed with the camera feeds, documenting their affair with the methodical precision of a detective. What I discovered made my stomach turn. This wasn't some recent fling or moment of weakness. Based on their comfort level and the intimate details I observed, this had been going on for months, possibly even before Leah and Marcus got married. The way they moved together, the shorthand communication between them, the familiarity of their routine, it all pointed to a long-term relationship that had been carefully hidden from everyone. The worst part was watching how David transformed with her. He became animated, laughing and playful in ways I hadn't seen in years. With me, he was distant and dismissive. With Leah, he was the man I had fallen in love with 32 years ago. She was getting the best parts of him while I got the leftovers. The irritable, tired version who came home and barely acknowledged my existence. I started paying closer attention to their behavior at family dinners. Now that I knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. The way Leah's hand would brush against David's when she passed him the salt, how she laughed just a little too hard at his jokes, the meaningful glances they shared when they thought no one was looking. My poor Marcus seemed oblivious to it all. He would sit there holding his wife's hand, talking about their plans to start trying for a baby soon, while she sat next to him having an affair with his father. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. But it was during a family barbecue 3 weeks after my discovery that I overheard something that changed everything. I was in the kitchen preparing dessert when I heard voices from the back patio. David and Leah were alone outside while Marcus had gone to the store for more ice. Their conversation drifted through the open window, and what I heard made my blood run cold. "He's starting to ask questions about why I'm not ready to try for a baby yet," Leah was saying. "I keep making excuses, but he's getting suspicious." "Just tell him you want to wait another year," David replied. "We need more time to figure this out." "Figure what out exactly? You keep saying you're going to leave Kelly, but when? I can't keep living this lie forever." My hands stilled on the mixing bowl. David was planning to leave me? For her? "I know, sweetheart. It's complicated. The business, the house, everything is tied up together. I need to be strategic about this." "Strategic," Leah repeated, and I could hear the bitterness in her voice. "That's what you always say. Meanwhile, I'm stuck playing house with your son while wanting to be with you." "It won't be much longer, I promise. Once I get everything arranged financially, we can be together properly." I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles went white. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together. David was going to destroy our family, leave Marcus devastated, and run off with his wife. And from the sound of it, Leah had never had any real feelings for my son at all. He was just a convenient cover for her relationship with his father. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. These weren't people who had fallen into a moment of weakness and were torn apart by guilt. These were calculated predators who had orchestrated this entire situation for their own gratification, and they didn't care who got hurt in the process. That night, after David fell asleep, I sat in our living room with my laptop and began researching divorce attorneys. I wasn't going to wait around for him to serve me papers when it was convenient for him. If he wanted out of this marriage, he was going to discover that I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. I found Margaret Steinberg, an attorney known for handling complex divorce cases involving business assets. Her reviews were impressive, and several clients mentioned her skill at uncovering hidden assets and financial manipulation. She sounded perfect for what I needed. The consultation was scheduled for the following Tuesday, when David would be out of town on a business trip. At least that's what he told me. For all I knew, he was planning a romantic getaway with Leah. Margaret's office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel that made me feel small and out of place. But the moment I met her, I knew I had chosen the right person. She was probably in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Tell me about your situation, Mrs. Henderson," she said, settling back in her chair with a legal pad. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head dozens of times, but sitting there in that professional office, the words came tumbling out in a rush. I told her about the affair, about the cameras, about what I had overheard. I showed her some of the recorded footage on my phone, feeling my face burn with embarrassment as she watched my husband betray me with our daughter-in-law. Margaret's expression remained professional throughout, but I caught a flicker of disgust when she realized who David was cheating with. "This is particularly egregious," she said when I finished. "Not only is he committing adultery, but he's destroying your son's marriage in the process. Courts don't look kindly on this kind of behavior." "What are my options?" I asked. "Several. Texas is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of all marital assets. But given the circumstances, we might be able to argue for more. The adultery, combined with the family destruction aspect, could work in our favor. How long has your husband been planning to leave you?" "I'm not sure. Based on what I overheard, it sounds like he's been getting his finances in order to make it easier to leave me with as little as possible." Margaret nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, that's common. Cheating spouses often spend months or even years moving assets around before they file for divorce. But if we can prove that, we can usually get those assets back. Do you have access to financial records?" "Some. We have joint accounts, but I know he has some business accounts I don't have access to." "We'll need to move quickly then. I'm going to recommend that we file immediately and request a temporary restraining order on all assets. The longer we wait, the more time he has to hide money." The retainer fee was $5,000, money I withdrew from our joint savings account the next day. David would see the transaction eventually, but by then it would be too late. As I drove home from the bank, I felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. For 32 years, I had been the accommodating wife, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone happy. I had never fought for anything in my life. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my son, who deserved to know the truth about the woman he had married. I was fighting for the years of my life that had been stolen by lies and manipulation. And if I timed everything right, I could serve David his divorce papers at the one place where it would have maximum impact, at Marcus and Leah's wedding anniversary party next month. Leah wanted to play games with my family? Perfect. I would show her exactly what happened when you underestimated a woman who had nothing left to lose. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, everyone would see who David and Leah really were. The anniversary party was exactly 1 week away when I made my final, most devastating discovery. I had been diligently collecting evidence for Margaret, printing photos and saving video files to multiple flash drives. The cameras had captured dozens of encounters between David and Leah, each one more brazen than the last. They had grown so comfortable in their deception that they barely bothered to hide their tracks anymore. But it was a conversation I recorded on a Wednesday afternoon that revealed the true depth of their betrayal. I was at my weekly book club meeting when the motion alert came through. These Wednesday encounters had become routine for them, timed perfectly when I was predictably out of the house. But this time, instead of immediately getting physical, they lay in bed talking for nearly an hour. I sat in my car after book club ended, parked in the library parking lot, listening to their conversation through my headphones. "I can't wait until this is all over," Leah was saying. "Playing the loving daughter-in-law is getting exhausting." David chuckled. "You've been doing a great job. Kelly absolutely adores you. She has no idea what's coming." "Sometimes I feel bad about Marcus," Leah admitted. "He's so trusting, so sweet. He really loves me." "Don't start feeling guilty now," David warned. "We've come too far for that. Besides, he'll be fine. He's young. He'll find someone else." "Someone else who actually wants to be with him," Leah said with a laugh that made my stomach turn. God, the way he talks about having babies together. I've been faking everything for so long. I don't know how he hasn't figured it out. My hands clenched around the phone. My son believed he was in a loving marriage with a woman who wanted to build a life with him. when the truth was she was just using him as a cover for her affair with his father. Speaking of which, David continued, I got the papers from my accountant yesterday. Once I transfer the business assets to the offshore account, Kelly won't be able to touch them in the divorce. My blood went cold. He was hiding assets, just as Margaret had suspected. How much are we talking about? Leah asked. About $800,000. Enough for us to start fresh somewhere new. Maybe that house in Costa Rica you liked. $800,000. Money that was legally half mine. Money he was stealing while pretending to be a loving husband. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. And you're sure she won't fight the divorce? David's laughter was bitter. Kelly? She's never fought for anything in her life. She'll probably just be relieved that she doesn't have to pretend we're happy anymore. I'll give her the house and enough to live on, and she'll take it gratefully. What about Marcus? What about him? By the time we tell him about us, it'll be too late for him to do anything about it. He'll be angry for a while, but he'll get over it. Family always does. I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. They had it all planned out. Every detail of how they would destroy my family and waltz away with barely a backward glance. David thought he knew me so well. Thought I was the weak, passive woman who would simply accept whatever scraps he threw my way. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The rest of their conversation revealed even more damaging details. They had been meeting regularly for 8 months, since before Marcus and Leah's first anniversary. Leah had been the aggressor initially, seducing David at a family barbecue when she claimed she needed help moving some furniture to the guest room. David had been flattered by the attention of a younger woman and hadn't resisted for long. They talked about my son with casual cruelty, dismissing his feelings and his future as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience. They mocked his romantic gestures, his plans for their future, even his performance in bed. Listening to them tear apart my child with such viciousness filled me with a rage I had never experienced before. By the time I got home, I had made several decisions. First, I called Margaret and told her about the offshore account. She immediately filed an emergency motion to freeze all assets pending the divorce proceedings. David would discover that his carefully laid plans had been thwarted, but not until it was too late. Second, I made copies of the most damaging recordings and saved them to multiple locations. Margaret would use them in the divorce proceedings, but I had other plans for them as well. Third, I began planning exactly how I would reveal everything at the anniversary party. Marcus and Leah were hosting the party themselves, celebrating 2 years of marriage with about 50 friends and family members. They had rented a beautiful event space at the country club, complete with a photographer and an elaborate dinner. Leah had been planning it for months, talking excitedly about how perfect everything would be. Perfect. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent the next few days making my own preparations. I contacted a local electronics store and arranged to rent a professional sound system with wireless microphone capabilities. I told them it was for a surprise presentation at my daughter-in-law's anniversary party, which wasn't entirely a lie. I also made an appointment with my hairdresser and bought a new dress. If I was going to destroy my marriage and expose my daughter-in-law's affair in front of 50 people, I was going to look good doing it. The hardest part was acting normal around David and Marcus. David continued his routine as if nothing had changed, kissing me goodbye each morning with the same absent-minded affection he had shown for years. He had no idea that I knew about the offshore account, or that Margaret had already frozen it. His phone calls with his accountant had become increasingly frantic, but he hadn't said anything to me about it. Marcus called several times during the week, excited about the party, and grateful that I was helping with some of the preparations. His happiness and innocence broke my heart. In 1 week, his entire world would collapse, and there was no way to protect him from that pain. But I couldn't let that stop me. Marcus deserved to know the truth about the woman he had married, even if that truth would devastate him. He deserved the chance to find real love with someone who actually wanted to be with him. The night before the party, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and reviewed my plan one final time. I had printed copies of the most damaging photos and conversations, sealed them in elegant envelopes that looked like party favors. Each envelope was addressed to a specific person: Marcus, my sister-in-law, David's business partner, Leah's parents, and several other key family members. I had also prepared a short speech, something I had practiced until I could recite it without breaking down. It was calm, factual, and devastating. No dramatics, no screaming or throwing things. Just the truth, delivered with the dignity that David and Leah had never shown me. Margaret had the divorce papers ready to be served at the party. She had arranged for a process server to be waiting in the parking lot, ready to make it official the moment I gave the signal. As I went to bed that night, David sleeping peacefully beside me for what I knew would be the last time, I felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow, everything would change. My marriage would be over, my relationship with my son would be forever altered, and my entire life would have to be rebuilt from scratch. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. David and Leah thought they were so clever, so careful in their deception. They had no idea that I had been 3 steps ahead of them for weeks. Tomorrow, they would learn that underestimating a woman scorned was the biggest mistake they could have made. The country club looked absolutely beautiful that Saturday evening. Leah had outdone herself with the decorations, creating an elegant atmosphere with white roses, twinkling lights, and soft jazz playing in the background. Guests mingled with champagne glasses, laughing and celebrating what they believed was a happy marriage reaching its second milestone. If only they knew. I arrived early, telling Marcus I wanted to help with last-minute preparations. In reality, I needed time to set up my surprise. The rented sound system was already in place, disguised as part of the evening's entertainment setup. The DJ had been told that there would be a special presentation during dinner, and he had agreed to hand over the microphone when I gave him the signal. The envelopes were hidden in my purse, each one carefully labeled and ready for distribution. Margaret's process server was parked outside, waiting for my text message. Everything was in perfect position. David arrived looking handsome in his navy suit, playing the role of the proud father-in-law. He kissed my cheek and complimented my new dress, acting like the devoted husband he had never actually been. Watching him work the room, charming guests with his easy smile and warm handshakes, I marveled at how well he could lie. 32 years of marriage, and I was just now seeing who he really was. Leah looked stunning in a flowing cream-colored dress that hugged her figure perfectly. She had her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless. As she greeted guests and accepted congratulations on reaching 2 years of marriage, she glowed with happiness that I now knew was completely fake. Marcus stood beside his wife, his arm around her waist, beaming with pride and love. He kept looking at her like she was the most wonderful thing in the world, completely oblivious to the fact that she was performing the role of loving wife, while counting down the days until she could leave him for his father. My heart broke watching him. In a few hours, that innocent joy would be destroyed forever, but it had to be done. He deserved the truth, no matter how painful it would be. The cocktail hour passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. I played my part perfectly. The loving mother-in-law celebrating her son's happiness. Several people commented on how radiant I looked, how happy I seemed. If they only knew that I was practically vibrating with anticipation for what was coming. During dinner, I barely touched my food. My stomach was twisted in knots, and my hands trembled slightly every time I reached for my water glass. David sat beside me, occasionally placing his hand on my arm in gestures of casual affection that now made my skin crawl. Across the table, Leah and Marcus were feeding each other bites of their dinner, playing the part of devoted newlyweds. The speeches began after the main course. Marcus went first, talking about how grateful he was to have found his soulmate, how excited he was about their future together, how he couldn't wait to start a family with the woman of his dreams. Every word was like a knife twisting in my chest, knowing what I was about to reveal. Leah spoke next, thanking everyone for celebrating with them and talking about how blessed she felt to be part of such a wonderful family. She looked directly at David when she said this, and I caught the subtle smile they shared. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Then it was time for the family speeches. David's brother spoke first, followed by Leah's maid of honor. Finally, the DJ announced that I would be giving the closing remarks on behalf of the family. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress and walking to the front of the room with steady steps. The rented microphone was waiting for me, and I could see the confusion on several faces as I approached the professional sound equipment that wasn't part of the original plan. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "It means so much to Marcus and Leah to have your love and support as they celebrate this milestone." Nods and smiles around the room. Marcus looked proud, Leah looked slightly puzzled by the elaborate setup, and David was checking his phone, probably wondering why his offshore account transfer wasn't going through. "Marriage is such a sacred institution," I continued, feeling my heart rate slow down as I settled into the rhythm of my prepared speech. "It's built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. When two people stand before God and their families and promise to forsake all others, we believe they mean it." A few people said amen softly. Leah was still smiling, but something in her expression was beginning to shift. "But sometimes people make promises they have no intention of keeping. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who betray us in the most devastating ways." The room was getting quieter now. Marcus was frowning, looking back and forth between me and Leah. David had put his phone down and was staring at me with growing alarm. "I've learned some very interesting things about marriage recently," I said, pulling out my phone and connecting it to the sound system. "Things that I think all of you should know before we continue celebrating." "Mom, what are you doing?" Marcus called out, his voice tight with confusion. "I'm telling the truth, sweetheart. Something that's been in very short supply around here lately." I pressed play on the first audio file. Leah and David's voices filled the room, crystal clear through the professional speakers. "I can't wait until this is all over. Playing the loving daughter-in-law is getting exhausting. You've been doing a great job. Kelly absolutely adores you. She has no idea what's coming." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps echoed through the room as people recognized the voices. Marcus went white as a sheet, his mouth falling open in shock. Leah jumped to her feet, her face flushed with panic. "Turn it off!" she screamed, but I was nowhere near finished. The recording continued, playing their casual discussion about Marcus's feelings, their plans to steal $800,000, their mockery of my son's trust and love. With each word, the horror on the guests' faces deepened. David stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Kelly, stop this right now." "Sit down, David," I said calmly into the microphone. "Everyone deserves to hear what kind of man you really are." I played the clip where they discussed the offshore account, where David bragged about how I would never fight the divorce because I was too weak and passive. Several people were recording with their phones now, capturing every moment of the devastating revelation. Marcus was staring at his wife with a look of absolute betrayal. "Leah, tell me this isn't real. Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Leah's composure cracked completely. Tears were streaming down her face, but they looked more like tears of anger and frustration than remorse. "It's not what it sounds like," she said weakly. But even she seemed to know how pathetic that sounded. "It's exactly what it sounds like," I said, cutting off the audio and addressing the room directly. "My husband has been having an affair with our daughter-in-law for 8 months. They've been planning to destroy our family so they can run away together with money stolen from our marriage." The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting, chairs were scraping against the floor as guests stood up, and several of Leah's family members were staring at her with expressions of complete shock and disgust. "You're lying!" Leah shouted, but her voice was shaking. "This is all fake! She's trying to destroy us because she's jealous!" I pulled out the first envelope and handed it to Marcus. "These are photos from the hidden cameras I installed in our bedroom. You can see for yourself exactly what your wife and your father have been doing." Marcus opened the envelope with trembling hands. The moment he saw the first photo, his face went completely white. He dropped the envelope, photos scattering across the floor, and staggered backward like he'd been physically struck. "Dad?" he whispered, looking at David with eyes full of pain and confusion. "How could you do this to me?" David's face was red with rage and embarrassment. "This is insane, Kelly. You've lost your mind." "Have I?" I pulled out my phone again. Should I play the recording where you discuss Marcus's performance in bed? Or maybe the one where you laugh about how trusting and pathetic he is? Stop, Marcus said quietly, his voice breaking. Please, just stop. I looked at my son, seeing the devastation in his eyes, and felt my resolve waver for just a moment. But then I remembered all the times they had laughed about him, all the cruel things they had said, and I steeled myself. I'm sorry, Marcus. You deserve to know the truth. I began distributing the other envelopes to key family members and friends. Each one contained copies of the most damaging evidence, ensuring that David and Leah's reputations would be destroyed not just tonight, but permanently. Leah's mother opened her envelope and immediately began crying. David's business partner looked at the photos with disgust and shook his head. One by one, the people who had respected and trusted them saw the truth. You vindictive bitch! Leah screamed at me, her mask finally slipping completely. You've ruined everything. No, I said calmly. You ruined everything. I just made sure everyone knew about it. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Margaret. 30 seconds later, the process server walked into the room with a legal envelope. David Henderson? He asked. David was standing frozen, watching his world collapse around him. What? You've been served with divorce papers and a restraining order freezing all marital assets. The final humiliation. David opened the papers with shaking hands, his face going from red to ashen as he read about the frozen offshore account and the charges of financial fraud that Margaret had filed. The party was over. Guests were filing out, some still recording, others calling friends and family to spread the news. Marcus sat at his table with his head in his hands, surrounded by scattered photos of his wife's betrayal. Leah was crying hysterically. Her perfect anniversary party turned into a public nightmare. As I watched the chaos unfold around me, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. It was done. The truth was out, and there was no going back for any of us. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe freely. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment overlooking the lake, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The silence was profound and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed my life after that devastating anniversary party. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks ago. Margaret had done an exceptional job, recovering not just the $800,000 David had tried to hide, but additional assets he had been slowly moving over the past 2 years. In the end, I received 70% of our marital assets, plus alimony, plus the house. The judge had been particularly harsh on David's behavior, calling it morally reprehensible and a betrayal of the most fundamental family bonds. David had tried to fight the settlement at first, hiring an expensive attorney and claiming that I had violated his privacy by recording him. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his lawyer eventually advised him to take the deal. The alternative was a very public trial that would have exposed even more of his shameful behavior. He and Leah had disappeared together about 3 months ago. I heard through mutual friends that they had moved to Florida, where David was working as a sales manager for some small company. The high-powered business executive image he had cultivated for decades was gone, replaced by the reality of a middle-aged man who had destroyed his family for a young woman who was already growing tired of him. Leah's parents had disowned her completely after seeing the evidence. Her mother had called me personally to apologize, crying as she told me how ashamed she was of her daughter's behavior. Leah's few remaining friends had all distanced themselves once the recordings became public. The perfect life she had been building was as much of an illusion as her marriage had been. But it was Marcus's recovery that filled me with the most hope. The first few weeks after the revelation had been devastating for him. He had moved back in with me temporarily, spending most of his time in his old bedroom, barely eating or speaking. I watched my strong, confident son crumble under the weight of the betrayal, and there were moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing by exposing the truth so publicly. But slowly, with the help of therapy and the support of friends who rallied around him, Marcus began to heal. He filed for divorce from Leah immediately, and she didn't contest it. She was too busy dealing with her own legal troubles. It turned out that some of the money she had spent during their marriage had come from credit cards she had opened in Marcus's name without his knowledge. The hardest part for Marcus was processing his father's betrayal. He told me later that losing his marriage was painful, but losing his father was devastating. David had been his hero, his role model, the man he had tried to pattern his life after. Learning that David was capable of such cruelty had shaken his fundamental beliefs about family and trust. But it had also freed him in ways he was still discovering. Last month, Marcus had started dating again. Her name was Sarah, a teacher he met through a friend, and when he brought her to dinner at my new apartment, I could see something in his eyes that had been missing during his marriage. Genuine happiness, real connection, the ease of being with someone who actually wanted to be with him. "She's amazing, Mom," he had told me after Sarah left that night. "She laughs at my actual jokes, not just the ones she thinks she should laugh at. And when she looks at me, she really sees me." I never realized how lonely I was with Leah until I met someone who makes me feel understood. It was the first time he had spoken his ex-wife's name without flinching. My own healing had been different but equally profound. The first month after the divorce was finalized, I had felt lost. After 32 years of defining myself as David's wife, I didn't know who Kelly Henderson was supposed to be. I wandered through my days feeling untethered, unsure of what I wanted or what came next. Then my sister Janet had suggested I try something completely new. She had been taking pottery classes at the community center and thought I might enjoy the creative outlet. I had dismissed the idea at first. I had never been artistic, had never seen myself as the type of person who made things with her hands. But desperation makes you willing to try anything, so I signed up for a beginner's class. It turned out I had a natural talent for working with clay. There was something deeply satisfying about taking shapeless earth and transforming it into something beautiful and functional. My instructor, a woman named Rose, who was about my age and had been divorced for 10 years, became both a mentor and a friend. "Clay doesn't lie to you," she told me during one of our sessions. "It responds to exactly the pressure you give it, nothing more and nothing less. It's honest in a way that people often aren't." I had been taking classes for 4 months now, and my small apartment was filled with bowls and vases and decorative pieces that I had created. Each one represented a small victory, proof that I was capable of making something beautiful from nothing. But the biggest surprise had been discovering that I wasn't alone in starting over. The pottery studio was full of women like me, women who had been divorced or widowed, or who had simply decided that they wanted more from life than what they had settled for. We formed an unlikely support group, sharing stories and encouraging each other through the difficult process of rebuilding our identities. There was Margaret, a 62-year-old retired nurse whose husband had left her for his physical therapist. Linda, 55, whose spouse had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her to figure out how to live alone for the first time in 30 years. Carol, who was 60 and had never married, having spent her life caring for aging parents, and now finally free to pursue her own interests. We had started meeting for coffee after class, then for dinner, then for weekend trips to art fairs and museums. For the first time in decades, I had a group of female friends who knew me as Kelly, not as David's wife or Marcus's mother. They saw me as a complete person with my own thoughts and interests and dreams. It was Carol who had encouraged me to enter one of my pieces in the county art fair. I had resisted at first, convinced that my work wasn't good enough, but she had worn me down with persistent encouragement. To my amazement, my ceramic vase had won second place in the amateur division. The prize was only $50 and a small ribbon, but holding that award had felt like winning the lottery. It was tangible proof that I had value beyond my relationships with other people. The recognition had led to a commission. A local restaurant wanted me to create a set of custom serving bowls for their opening. It wasn't much money, but it was the first time in my life that someone had paid me for something I had created with my own hands. As I sat in my sunlit apartment this morning, looking at the pieces I had made and the ribbon hanging on my refrigerator, I felt a contentment that I had never experienced during my marriage. This was what happiness felt like, Not the desperate clinging to scraps of attention that had defined my relationship with David, but a quiet satisfaction that came from within. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner Sunday? Sarah wants to try that new restaurant downtown." I smiled as I typed back my acceptance. My relationship with my son was stronger now than it had ever been. The crisis had forced us to be honest with each other in ways we never had before, and we had discovered that we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Another text came in, this one from Rose. "Art fair next weekend. Want to check out the competition?" I was already looking forward to it. The doorbell rang and I glanced at the clock, puzzled. It was barely 8 in the morning, too early for visitors. I opened the door to find a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of wildflowers. "Kelly Henderson?" "That's me." He handed me the flowers in a small envelope. I tipped him and closed the door, wondering who could be sending me flowers on a random Tuesday morning. The card was from Margaret, Linda, and Carol. "Congratulations on your new life. You inspire us all." I sat down in my reading chair, holding the flowers and feeling tears prick my eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of gratitude for the unexpected gift that had come from my greatest loss. David and Leah had taken my old life away from me, but in doing so, they had forced me to discover who I really was underneath all the roles I had played for so many years. They had thought they were destroying me, but instead, they had set me free. I was 58 years old, divorced, and starting completely over. 6 months ago, that would have terrified me. Today, it felt like the beginning of the best adventure of my life. The phone rang again, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer it. "Hello? Is this Kelly Henderson, the ceramics artist?" I paused, a smile spreading across my face. "Yes, it is. My name is James Morrison. I own the Morrison Gallery downtown, and I've been hearing wonderful things about your work. I was wondering if you might be interested in discussing a possible exhibition." As I listened to him explain the opportunity, I looked out at the lake sparkling in the morning sun and felt my heart fill with possibilities I had never dared to imagine. This was my life now. Not the life I had planned, not the life I had thought I wanted, but the life I had earned through courage and determination and the willingness to bet on myself. And it was more beautiful than anything I could have dreamed. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.